Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba from Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the resident legal diva, and it's time for another Mondays with Melba. So first off, today is Rosh Hashanah. So it is Shana Tova to everyone who is celebrating. Happy New Year, and may the new year bring you blessings and everything that you've worked for and wished for. Keeping in the vein of keeping everyone election ready, we are now less than 2 months away from Election Day. So, number one, double check that you are registered, double check that you are registered with the party that you have chosen, and make sure that you have a voting plan. So, you know if you're going to vote by mail, if you're going to vote early, or if you're going to vote in person on the day of, and know who's on the ballot, what's on the ballot, and be prepared for, elections and being ready to vote. So in that vein, I'm bringing you today Allison Miller, who is running for state attorney in Pinellas County here in Florida. So welcome to Mondays with Melba, Allison.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So let's talk about you. Tell everyone a little bit about your background and why you're running for state attorney.
Sure. So the Sixth Circuit is all of Pinellas and all of Pasco counties. So I get Pinellas and Pasco. And, everybody asks with all the redistricting and the things that happened this year, can I vote for you? If you live in Pinellas or Pasco, you vote for this position. And it's even more of an anomaly because we have not had an election for state attorney for the Sixth Circuit in 30 years. Bernie Mccabe. Wow. It gets more fun. So Bernie Mccabe was our long-serving state attorney who passed last January. And so because he died in the first 20 months of his term, we're having a special election November 8th to seat the remainder of this 4-year term. And Bernie last had an opponent, in 1992. But that was another Republican in a primary. We actually had to look up when the last time, we had pulled the state archives to find when the last time a Democrat ran for state attorney here was, and it was 1964. So,
oh my gosh, I can't.
Right. Okay. Right. So for most people, this race has not been on a general election ballot in their lifetime. So half the time I'm telling folks, state attorney is what most places call the district attorney. It's the top prosecutor. And we had all those conversations after George Floyd was murdered about law enforcement reform, but that didn't really translate to prosecutorial reform, at least not locally for us, because we haven't had contested elections. And so, I'm telling folks that, the police get to decide who gets arrested, and that's critically important, but the state attorney gets to decide who gets charged and with what sentence we recommend, if we offer that person diversion or pretrial intervention, if we charge a child as an adult, if we seek the death penalty. I mean, the law in Florida, as you know, affords the state attorney tremendous discretion. But I am a career public defender, actually. I have been a public defender about 15 years. I had to resign to run. I started my career as a certified legal intern at the PD's office in Tallahassee, where I met my husband. He and I relocated to the Tampa Bay area. His family was in Sarasota. Mine was in Orlando, and we kind of split the difference.
Yep.
And I've often felt like I could work on either side of the aisle. I understand it's an adversarial system, but I felt like there's the tremendous ability to help people as both a state attorney or a public defender. And so I actually interviewed at all 4 offices in the area because Hillsborough is a separate circuit. So applied at Mark Ober's state attorney's office, Julie Holt's public defender's office, Bob Dillinger's public defender's office, and Bernie McCabe's state attorney's office. Actually interviewed with my opponent about 15 years ago.
Wow.
I know. Yeah. And he's thrown out the lobs that like just one day I woke up and decided I wanted to run for state attorney. And I'm like, except for that time that I interviewed with you, literally you. Actually you. But, Mr. Dillinger offered me a job at the public defender's office about an hour after I passed the bar, and I started the following Monday. And wow. I'm a person of faith, and I don't know if it's the stars, the universe aligning. I feel like it's very fortuitous, and I was meant to be exactly where I was supposed to be. I have done death penalty defense, capital defense in this state for about the last decade. So I defend people facing capital punishment. But beyond what I've done professionally, I got into criminal justice because I had been a victim of violent crime. And it's not stuff I love talking about. And in fact, in the course of this campaign, I've gotten attacked for it, which I, to be honest, never expected. I was held at it's been wild. I was held at gunpoint when I was 14. I walked into a robbery in progress in a Walgreens in Orlando. I will never forget. My dad very begrudgingly drove me up there to pick up pictures. I was going to make a scrapbook, and he wanted to get home to make sure he saw the Bulls play in the NBA playoffs. It was like one of Michael Jordan's last seasons. And I walked in and there was a man with a gun behind the cashier. And I got maybe 5-6 feet inside the door, and he told me to not effing move. And I listened. There were maybe 2 or 3 other patrons in the store, and it was very clear the cashier she was so nervous that she couldn't overcome the fail safes to get the cash register open. And so at some point he says, everybody in here is going to give me their wallets or they die. My dad had walked in, I couldn't even tell you when, to see what was taking me so long. And he's trying to push me to get me into the actual aisles. And I kept thinking Dad, he's seen us, Jimbo, you were going to get us killed here. And the guy came around and we all gave money and wallets. And, what I remember most strikingly is Walgreens used to have that metal bar, and you could only go out the out and in the in. And he was trying to go out the in. And even as a 14-year-old, I very much knew he was under the influence of something. And that was probably the first time I thought I was going to die, that he was just going to start spraying bullets into the glass or turn around, but fortunately had the good sense to go under the railing and go out the outdoor. He carjacked a woman in the parking lot. She came running in holding a very young toddler, screaming, "My baby." My dad's trying to hold her up. We were trying to figure out if there was another child in the car, or if she was just frantic about this child in her arms who had this, big red scratch across his face from being, violently yanked out of the car seat as she's trying to get her child out of the car mid being carjacked. And so and beyond that, I was a victim of sexual violence in college, which I like talking about even less. And the reason I share those things, is because they're who I am. And I certainly didn't have the insight at the time, certainly not as a 14-year-old, right? But when I say I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now in this moment, it is those incidents coupled with my experience as a criminal defense lawyer that I think make me particularly well situated for this position. The man that I'm running against was appointed by Governor DeSantis after Bernie Mccabe, the long-serving state attorney, died. And when Bruce Bartlett got appointed, he said the thing that makes his office the most effective is the lack of change.
Oof.
Out loud. And that
quiet part he said out loud. Yeah.
Right, to the paper. And that's frank. I had been asked to consider running. And I was very on the fence. I loved my job. I'm very good at it. I think if the government is trying to execute one of its citizens, that person is entitled to not only advocacy, very zealous advocacy. And I could have contentedly continued doing that work forever. But then I started thinking, do I want to be doing literally the exact same work in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Because the system is clearly, the man's already said out loud, it's not going to change. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to run against him.
I mean, is that kind of bravery. And, and it's really funny because you and I have gone on parallel paths, everybody watching knows that I ran in 2020. And it's the type of thing where you don't come to that decision very lightly or very easily. Right. It's not one of those things you just wake up one day, much like the debate, you just wake up one day and be like, oh, I think I'm just going to run. Right. You want to do it and you want to do it effectively. You have to have a plan and you have to make sacrifices. Right. This is not, you got to give up some things that you may love and enjoy doing for the greater good. So I definitely commend you on that. And I also commend you on the fact that I know this isn't easy for you. It was not easy for me sharing those types of personal details on the campaign trail because, I am a survivor of both sexual violence and domestic violence. And I never like to talk about it because who wants to talk about the worst day of your life, right? And you don't want to be defined as, oh, you're a survivor or you're a victim or you're this, but it is part of your journey. It is part of who you are and does impact how you see the world and how justice should be administered through your eyes. So these are all important things to consider. Wanted to kind of circle back to the point that there had not been an election with regards to this office in 30 years, and how, as much as we're both kind of laughing and both a little shocked, it's not that unusual, is it?
No, and
'Cause
that's the good old boy cronyism here is in well regard. Um, yeah, I mean all of it, it's almost like a how dare you deign to upset the status quo. And that's not like Jimmy Russell was the state attorney here in the 70s and the 80s, and he never had an opponent, and he retired and kind of tapped his number two, Bernie McCabe, as his heir apparent. And then Bernie, as I mentioned, had the one opponent in a Republican primary. I think that was his first election cycle in 1992, and was here 30 years. And Bernie said he wanted to die in office, and he did at 73
literally
years
did.
old. Right. And it made me sad for those that love and mourn him. But yeah, said he wanted to stay till he passed. And so he was there till January 1st of 2021 when he died. And then his number two was appointed. And, you talk about like just one morning I woke up and decided I was going to run for state attorney. You can appreciate this probably better than most. Running for office isn't that much fun.
No, no, it really isn't. It really isn't.
Right. And like you give up. I mean, my family, I'm married. I mentioned my husband, and I have a 7-year-old daughter. My parents are in the area, and I keep getting referred to as a Soros funded liberal who's going to let everybody out of prison. And it's wild because the Florida Department of Corrections hasn't given me the keys. So I'm not really sure how I'm letting everybody out of prison. But no, and I've also received $0 from George Soros, but I live here with my family. And so the idea that I would do anything to make these counties less safe is absurd. And it's like, there's nothing I take more seriously than being a mom. And so the idea of, putting her, other babies, other children, other families in harm's way is absurd, and it's offensive. And so, yeah, you take a beating running for office, but you tell yourself, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, that it's worth something. It's worth the greater good. It's worth, you meet people in the course of these campaigns who are so dependent upon you to get elected. I mean, sometimes I feel very panicked because it is very dire here. We have had a status quo that I frankly don't think the leadership at the state attorney's office, possess the ability to reform. Mm-hmm. And so it does feel very dire and very urgent. It felt that way when it started. And now over the course of the last 18 months while running, I think things have gotten even more critical with some of the things we've watched the governor and our legislature do, and recognizing that prosecutors are going to be very much on the front line in this state real soon.
Yeah. Already, I mean, listen, in your next door neighbor, Andrew Warren, got unceremoniously yanked out of office by armed guards as if he had just, committed an armed robbery, right? So armed law enforcement came in and yanked him out of his office for, in my opinion, expressing political speech, being like, listen, and I don't support this. I don't support that. At the end of the day, there's no law with regards to pertaining to transgender care, saying that it's illegal in the state of Florida. That was not in place at the time Andrew Warren made those statements. It isn't in place now. And with regards to the abortion ban, listen, nobody's been arrested as an abortion doctor for providing services, and no one's been arrested for seeking an abortion. So again, it's not like these are pending cases in front of him and he's, making some kind of broad statement. So, with all of this and all of this as the backdrop, it definitely adds that sense of urgency of, okay, we've got to elect the right people to be able to push back against these mentalities. But getting more into what you want to do, tell us a little bit more about your platform and some of the top 3 to 5 changes you want to implement day one when you get elected. Notice when. Well,
and we're right. We're manifesting it into existence. And one of the groups I want to work with is the prosecutorial performance indicators, because that's part of the problem here, is that we don't take stock of where we're at. So how can we possibly improve upon it? I mean, I'm used to hearing the state attorney's office say, I don't know the race. I don't see color. Yeah. Right. I don't know the race of the child I charge as an adult. I don't know the race of the defendant I charge with a crime. And we all know you do. And if you really don't, and the statistics are as disparate as they exist in the Sixth Circuit, then you should know. And that's why I mentioned that as segue. If I could do anything, it would be more expansive diversion. The Sixth Circuit, prior to last year, the pandemic, of course, being an outlier when it comes to crime and crime reporting, these two counties sent more people to prison, according to the Florida Department of Corrections, than any other circuit in Florida every year. So year after year, the Sixth Circuit, and we're not the biggest, right? We have, between Pinellas and Pasco counties, we have about 1.6 million people, and we're certainly not the most crime-ridden. Miami-Dade is nearly 3 million people, and we put more people in prison every year. And I think there's this misconception you're only going to prison for violent crime. And here, about 50% of the people we send to prison are for nonviolent crime. Mm. And so I don't think that does anything to help promote public safety. Not I don't think. I know, based on my own anecdotal evidence, as well as every data study that's ever been done about incarcerating people for low-level nonviolent crime, right, that it doesn't promote public safety. When we put people in prison for things like drug possession or petty theft or driving while license suspended or revoked, almost all of those crimes are related to their own drug dependency, their own mental illness, their own poverty. We provide almost no rehabilitative services in the Department of Corrections. And then those folks get out with the same circumstances that got them in there. And now they're convicted felons. And we pretend to be shocked at the rates of recidivism, right? And that's what we say, the system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly how it was intended to. Mm-hmm. And I have identified a couple areas where we could do far more expansive things with our diversion. And one of the biggest things, and one of the areas that's most disparate as far as racial parity, is who we offer diversion to, because we have all of these disqualifiers based on prior contact with law enforcement. We all know you're far more likely to have prior contact with law enforcement in the system if you're Black or brown. And then because of that contact, we make you ineligible for our diversion programs that, if you're successful in completing, would avoid you having a conviction and hopefully would lead to you becoming a well-adjusted, law-abiding, rehabilitated person. So it doesn't just benefit the person who's found himself or herself in trouble. It benefits us as a community, right, to rehabilitate folks. And I think beyond that, we offer kind of cursory, and it's getting better. I don't want to not give credit where it is due. But we have, kind of limited therapeutic or treatment courts that largely focus on substance dependency. We have a veterans treatment court that for a long time didn't allow in anyone who didn't have combat experience. So it sort of necessarily excluded folks who served in the United States Navy. And as the granddaughter of 2 Navy service people, I had some objection to that. And so we have some of these services, but they're not providing the services that people really need to be successful. It's like when we put people on probation for drug possession and we know they're still using, and then when they violate for testing positive, we incarcerate them. And so I think we have to have diversion programs that are more individualized to the offender and far more comprehensive services, whether it be job training, helping folks get their identification, driver's license, access to opportunity. We have to provide the services that people need to be successful if we really expect them to be successful. And so I want to expand our eligibility for diversion. I want to give people the tools to be successful in completing it specific to that person's needs. And I want to eliminate money as a barrier to success. Yes. And so those are the 3 areas, right, where we've talked about expanding diversion. So that's area 1, and I know that's pretty comprehensive. 2 would be juvenile justice reform. Again, another one of our statistics. It's like we're number 1 for all of the terrible reasons. We also charged more children as adults than any other circuit in Florida last year, according to the Department of Juvenile Justice. Wow. And like in stark contrast, and my opponent acts like, the only kids being charged as adults are those that are committing violent crime or those that have exhausted all of the services of DJJ. And now he really is left with no choice but to charge this child as an adult. And I would disagree with that representation about who's being charged as adults. But beyond that, it's not like we're alone. I mean, every other circuit is dealing with children that are committing violent crime and have exhausted the services that DJJ has to offer, yet we are charging far more children than every other circuit. And 100% of the children we're charging comes through direct file. So at the sole discretion of the state attorney's office, we're not asking the judges for any kind of waivers into the adult. we appoint or elect these folks to call the balls or the strikes, but we're not involving them in this decision-making process at all.
Exactly.
And again, when I talk about disparity, Pinellas's population is only about 11% Black, but 75% of the children we charged as adults last year were Black. And so again, I'm running against someone who doesn't see color, right? Which is laughable, right? And I'm like, well, if you don't, and you know, the statistics are as bleak as they are here, then you should, sir. And so, I mean, I as a lawyer, I've been accused of getting into the weeds, right? The Eighth Amendment requires individualized sentencing, which includes anything about the defendant's character, background, or life that would mitigate against the harshest sentence being imposed. And I think that includes someone's race. And so I intend to see color for all its beautiful diversity and consider someone's background when determining what the appropriate sentence is for someone, certainly including children. But I think we have an ethical and moral responsibility to rehabilitate children. The data has overwhelmingly shown that if you put a child in prison, once that child is released, he or she is far more likely to reoffend by committing a crime of violence than if you had not put the child in prison. One of our local chiefs of police said to me the other, conservative Republican guy said, you incarcerate a kid for one day, he or she is more likely to recidivate for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
So I think we are very flip about how we treat children with very little regard for forward thinking, right? We focus almost exclusively on retribution and punishment here. And then it's like, and then what? What's going to happen when these folks get out of prison, child or adult? And the last area, and I know I'm long-winded, I apologize.
No, get that information out there. That's how you get folks election ready. Give them all that they need to know so they can make
Yeah, and the last area is just dramatic modernization of the state attorney's office. I mean, it made news here when the attorneys at the state attorney's office here got access to email last year. So that's right, the attorneys, 2021, there was a newspaper article about attorneys in the Sixth Circuit State Attorney's Office finally getting email.
The interwebs have been around for...
It's wild. It's wild. I told this story earlier that when law enforcement really led the push to put all of our tangible discoveries. So most of our agencies started using body-worn cameras after George Floyd was murdered, with the exception of like one or two agencies. And so prior to that, we were giving the state attorney's office discs, and they were like burning tangible discovery and giving it back to us, which of course takes forever. It's expensive. And so FDLE and our local law enforcement really led the push to put all of it on evidence.com. And I can recall, as part of the leadership of the public defender's office at the time, everybody got together because they were like, this is going to be a tough sell for the state attorney's office. They don't have email. And saying to Mr. Mccabe, you know, we want to put this all on evidence. And it was law enforcement saying, we want to put all of this on evidence.com. And his response was, I don't have the server space to put all of this on evidence.com. And they were like, no, let me explain how the internet works. You don't need the server space. Right? Like it's on a server in Atlanta or China, like somebody else, it's in the cloud somewhere. Right. And then he was like, well, I'm not buying new computers for this. And they were like, no, same computers, right? You just go to evidence.com. And like, even now we've gone to it, but it is horribly inefficient and slow at this point. And some of the law enforcement agencies have said to me that because of the state attorney's office unwillingness to work with technology, they have become the general counsel for the police agencies concerned about the state's ability to protect their witnesses and law enforcement's identity. If you don't know how to use the technology, right, you can't redact whatever shouldn't be made publicly available. And so, I mean, that's kind of scratching at the surface. But beyond that, you know, I'm trying to hire women and people of color specific for leadership tracks at the office. There is only one attorney who is identified as Black in a lead trial attorney role. My opponent at a candidate forum this week said that he cannot hire people of color because they all go to big firms who are trying to fill their quotas.
That's like, I mean, maybe in his world, but the reality is at the National Black Prosecutors Association, when we have our job fair, there's no shortage of candidates coming through looking for prosecution jobs that look like me. So
right. Well, and that's what I said. Representation matters. I would have a huge problem if I walked into court and nobody looked at like me, wondering about the level of justice that I would get. And I've met with, so Stetson Law is right down the corner. It's in, or right around the corner, excuse me. It's in Pinellas County. And we, both the PDs and the state attorney's offices recruit largely from there, as well as the other law schools in Florida. And I've met with like BALSA, the Black Law Student Association, some of their leadership. And there is a tremendous distrust, right? When I say I want to hire people of color and women, not just to work at the office, but to cultivate longevity and loyalty and to be on a leadership track to hopefully ultimately run this office one day. And that, you know, it's going to take overcoming a long historical precedent. But we are actively trying to do so. I'm going to establish a civil rights unit that will have multiple facets, one of which will be the conviction integrity unit, which our office, the state attorney's office, does not have now. My opponent said he sees no need. You just hire good people on the front end, and those people apparently become infallible,
right.
right, and incapable. But beyond that, we are going to measure racial parity at all of the angles we've discussed. We're going to make all of that data publicly available on a dashboard on my website, as well as any data collected from the Prosecutorial Performance Indicators group. And I want to measure those things at day 1, day 90, day 180, day 270, day 365, because I fully intend on doing these things. And if I don't, you should vote me out. So Amen. I think those are the main 3 areas where I'm hoping to change the state attorney's office in my first year.
That all sounds amazing. And by the way, when she's referencing the prosecutorial performance indicators, that's my day job. So I'm part of a team at Florida International University where we work with prosecutors' offices at their invitation, and we look at their data and help them create public-facing dashboards where any member of the public can click on their prosecutor's website and see what justice looks like, how quickly cases move through the system, how diverse is the office, do people get the same outcomes despite, no matter their race, whether they are survivors of crime or they're accused of a crime, how does that all look? So these things are all super important. Okay, so wrapping up now, how can people learn more about you, donate, volunteer, and support your candidacy?
I'm going to answer that too, but I have to say something, because why I like prosecutorial performance indicators so much is not only do you measure based on the benchmarks that like sort of we in the business identify make a successful prosecutor or prosecution, you pull in the community. And I think that is so incredibly important, particularly in this community where we haven't had these conversations in darn near 60 years because we haven't had a contested general election. But so apologize for the digression. I am on all social media platforms. My website is millerforstateattorney.com. I'm on Facebook at Allison Miller for State Attorney, Twitter at Miller for State Attorney, Instagram at Miller for State Attorney, Twitter at AF Miller 2021. I'm on TikTok newly. Woo! I know, we're getting real fancy. We need, time, talent, treasure. Raising money is probably one of my least favorite parts of campaigning, but I realize it's not just asking people to donate. It's asking people to invest in something that I see as so critically important. I was willing to completely uproot my life to try to effectuate the change I think we so desperately need here. And so I'm asking people to share in that with me. If you live locally, even if you don't, there's an aspect or a part of my website where you can click to get involved. We are phone banking. We are door knocking. I don't think you can win with all the money, and I don't think you can win with all the grassroots. You need a little of both. And so we are working those doors hard while we're still fundraising, and we'd love to have anybody who's willing to work with us.
All right. So just so everybody knows, I'm going to drop the links in the chat, or if you're listening to this on the podcast, it's in the body of the description of this episode. So definitely check her out, get involved. She has my support and endorsement, and I invite you to join me in fighting for more progressive values, for more transparency in our state, and for more equity in our state. And this This is how it happens. It's by supporting state attorney candidates, by making sure that legacy club, that whole, well, they've been in office for 30 years, just let them retire out of there and wait your turn, right? Listen,
Right.
history wasn't made by the people who waited their turn, right? They saw an opportunity, they saw a need, and they fought for it. So definitely check out Allison's information and support her however you can. And thank you all for tuning in. Allison, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon and sharing your expertise and your platform. This is incredibly exciting and looking forward to some good news in November.
I hope so. And it's, this, all of the prosecutors, except for one, elect on the presidential election cycle. And so there's only 20 elected state attorneys in this state. Only 5 are Democrats now with Andrew Warren's removal. And of those Democrats, only 2 are women. But I am the only state attorney race on the ballot in all of Florida this election cycle, because it's the special election called about because of Mr. McCabe's passing. So could potentially have monumental consequences going forward with what our legislature and our governor, should he get reelected, have said their goals are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Elections matter, y'all. Elections matter. All right. Well,
thank you. Thank you
all. And thank y'all for tuning in. And we got another exciting episode coming up next week. So definitely tune in and take good care. Bye.